Let me show you something most people will never admit. You've built a perfect image. Strong, confident, unshakable. You don't show weakness. You don't flinch. You've trained yourself to keep your face still when someone insults you, to keep your voice steady when you're falling apart inside, to project absolute control while your chest is tight with fear. Because here's what they don't tell you about emotional invulnerability. The people who try hardest to appear invulnerable are the easiest to destroy. Have you ever noticed how the slightest criticism can ruin your entire day? How a casual joke at your expense feels like a knife in your chest? How you replay conversations for hours, analyzing whether someone saw through your mask? Have you ever felt your jaw clench when someone questions your competence? That flash of rage when someone challenges your story? That desperate need to prove them wrong, to defend yourself, to make them see you're not what they implied? The man who claims confidence explodes in anger because the tease touched the insecurity he is desperately trying to hide. Every time you react, you are proving the mask is a lie. The mask of strength you're wearing is not protecting you. It is the reason you are so easy to hurt. What if the armor you built to keep people out has actually trapped you inside with the very thing you're trying to escape? Think about the last time someone really got under your skin. Not a genuine attack, just a casual observation, a playful tease, a minor criticism. Why did it land so hard? Why could you feel it in your body? That tightness in your throat, that heat in your face, that overwhelming need to defend, explain, or attack back. Here's the truth you don't want to hear. You're not afraid of what they said. You're afraid they saw something you're desperately trying to hide. And that hidden thing, the weakness you bury, the fear you deny, the vulnerability you reject, that's the detonator everyone can push. That's why you're not invulnerable. That's why you're fragile. Carl Jung spent his entire career studying this pattern, and he discovered something that most people never understand about emotional strength. The people who are truly invulnerable aren't the ones with no weaknesses. They're the ones who've made their weaknesses useless as weapons. But that requires doing something that feels like psychological suicide. It requires looking directly at the part of yourself you've spent your entire life pretending doesn't exist. There's a name for that hidden part. Jung called it the shadow. And here's the rule that changes everything. You cannot be emotionally invulnerable until you integrate your shadow. You cannot be immune to manipulation when you're manipulating yourself. You cannot be untouchable when you're terrified of being touched. This is going to hurt to hear, but it's true. Every time you react, every time you defend, every time you need to prove something, you're proving that the mask is a lie, and everyone watching knows it. So what's really happening beneath the performance? What is the shadow, and why does pretending it doesn't exist give everyone else power over you? That's what we're going to explore. Not the comfortable lie that you can build a fortress strong enough to keep the world out, but the uncomfortable truth that the fortress is the problem, and the only way out is to tear it down from the inside. Emotional invulnerability is not about the absence of emotion. They believe it is achieved by building what Jung called the persona. The persona is the mask you show the world. It's the carefully constructed image of who you want people to think you are: strong, successful, confident, in control. The persona isn't necessarily fake. It's often built from real qualities you genuinely possess. But here's the problem. It's only part of you. And the effort required to maintain it as the whole truth is what makes you vulnerable. Think about it this way. You've got traits you're proud of: intelligence, humor, competence, strength. Those traits become part of your persona. You show them to the world. You build your identity around them. But you've also got traits you despise: weakness, neediness, jealousy, fear, insecurity, pettiness. Those traits don't fit the image you're trying to project. So what do you do with them? You bury them. You deny them. You tell yourself, I'm not that kind of person. You exile those qualities into the unconscious. And that's where the shadow lives. The shadow is everything you've rejected about yourself. Every emotion you've labeled as weak. Every desire you've judged as shameful. Every fear you've dismissed as pathetic. The shadow isn't evil. It's just the parts of you that don't match your self-image. Here's the reframe most people never get. The persona and the shadow are two sides of the same coin. The brighter you polish the persona, the darker the shadow becomes. The more you insist, I am only this, the more power you give to everything you're denying. And here's why that destroys your emotional invulnerability. The shadow doesn't go away just because you stop acknowledging it. It operates in the background, controlling your behavior without your awareness. The shadow is in action every time the man who insists he's confident can't handle a woman's playful test. The qualities you refuse to own consciously will own you unconsciously. Let me give you a concrete example. A man builds his persona around being strong and independent. He tells himself he doesn't need anyone. He doesn't show vulnerability. He doesn't ask for help. He's proud of his self-sufficiency. But buried in his shadow is a deep need for connection, a fear of abandonment, a desperate desire to be seen and accepted for who he really is, not just the performance he's giving. What happens when a woman he's dating starts pulling away? The persona does not hold. He finds himself obsessively checking his phone. Feeling that hollow ache in his chest, the persona says, "I don't need her." The shadow says, "Please don't leave me." And the gap between those two truths is where the suffering lives. Now here's where it gets worse. Because you're not aware of your shadow, you can't see it operating. But other people can. They might not be able to name it, but they can sense it. The disconnect between who you're pretending to be and who you actually are. And the moment someone senses that gap, you become manipulable. Think about the last time someone really triggered you. What were they doing? They were, consciously or not, applying pressure to the gap between your persona and your shadow. They were touching the thing you don't want to admit exists. When a woman teases a man about being too available, she's not attacking his persona, she's touching his shadow. The part of him that is desperate for approval, that does feel needy, that is terrified of rejection. If he'd integrated that part, he could laugh it off or acknowledge it without shame. But because he's buried it, the tease lands like a bomb. The mask cracks. The defense mechanisms activate. He gets angry. He withdraws. He tries to prove she's wrong, and in doing so, he proves she's right. Do you see the trap? The very act of defending the persona reveals the shadows. The more you react, the more obvious it is that you're hiding something. So if the persona is the problem, and the shadow is the hidden vulnerability, what's the solution? Is it to destroy the persona entirely? To become some kind of emotionally chaotic mess, spilling every dark thought and insecurity? No. That's just the opposite extreme, still a rejection of wholeness. Jung's answer was integration, and that's where the real transformation begins. But before we get to what integration actually means, you need to understand exactly how deep the shadow goes, and why the thing you're hiding from is the only thing that can set you free. Here's the truth you don't want to hear. The mask isn't protecting you. It's the thing that's making you fragile. Every moment you spend maintaining the persona, you're feeding power to the shadow, and the shadow is holding the detonator to your entire sense of self. Let me show you how this plays out in the real world, in the moments when you're most convinced you're strong, but you're actually at your most vulnerable. Scenario 1. The woman who sees through you. You're on a date. Things are going well. You're being charming, witty, confident, everything you've trained yourself to project. Your persona is performing flawlessly. Then she says something. It's playful, almost casual. Maybe she teases you about the way you said something. Maybe she makes a joke about you trying too hard. Maybe she just gives you a look that says, "I see what you're doing." And suddenly, your chest tightens. Your mind races. That easy confidence you had a moment ago evaporates. You feel exposed, caught, like a child who just got caught lying. Why? Because she didn't attack your persona, she touched your shadow, the part of you that is trying too hard, the part that's performing, the part that's desperately hoping she doesn't see the neediness, the insecurity, the fear of not being enough. Now, here's where the trap closes. You've got two options in this moment. Option 1, you react. You get defensive. You try to prove she's wrong. You pull back emotionally to punish her for seeing too much. You double down on the performance. And in doing so, you confirm everything she suspected. The mask cracks, and she sees exactly what you were trying to hide. Option 2, the option almost no one takes. You acknowledge it. You laugh. You say, "Yeah, you're right. I am trying a bit hard, aren't I?" You own the thing she saw instead of hiding from it. And something strange happens. The tension disappears. The power dynamic shifts. She's no longer testing you because there's nothing left to test. You've removed the gap between the persona and the shadow. You've made yourself invulnerable by admitting the vulnerability. Jung understood this at a level most people never reach. The things you acknowledge cannot be used against you. The moment you bring the shadow into the light, it loses its power as leverage. But most men never get there. They're so terrified of the weakness being exposed that they defend it to the death, and in doing so, they hand her the detonator. She doesn't even have to press it. Just knowing it's there changes the entire dynamic. The woman isn't attracted to the perfect persona. She's attracted to the man who doesn't need the persona because he's already faced what's beneath it. Scenario 2, the insult that destroys your day. You're in a social situation. A friend, or maybe someone you barely know, makes a joke at your expense. It's not even that harsh, just a casual jab about something minor, your clothes, your job, the way you reacted to something, and it lands like a punch to the gut. You keep your face neutral, you laugh it off, but inside, you're burning. You replay the moment over and over. You imagine the perfect comeback. You feel that sick mixture of shame and rage, and for the rest of the day, maybe the rest of the week, it haunts you. Why does this happen? Because the joke wasn't about what they said, it was about what they touched. Somewhere in your shadow, there's a part of you that agrees with them, a part that believes you're not good enough, not smart enough, not successful enough, a part you've spent years denying. The persona says, I'm confident, I'm successful, I don't care what they think. But the shadow whispers, what if they're right? What if I'm a fraud? What if everyone sees it? And that whisper is the real wound. The external comment is just the blade that cuts through to it. Now imagine a different person in the same situation. Someone who's done the shadow work. Someone who's integrated the truth that yes, they have flaws. Yes, they're insecure about certain things. Yes, they're not perfect. The same joke lands. And they genuinely laugh. Not as a performance, but because the joke doesn't threaten them. They've already acknowledged the flaw. They've already made peace with it. There's no hidden truth to protect. That's invulnerability. Not the absence of weakness, but the integration of it. Hold this visual in your mind. Imagine a theater. The actor on stage is your persona. Behind him, a massive screen shows a projection of every fear and insecurity he is trying to hide. The actor is desperately trying to keep the audience focused on the performance, terrified they'll look at the screen behind him. And that terror, that constant effort to control where everyone is looking, that's what makes the performance unconvincing. But the moment the actor turns around and acknowledges the projection, the moment he says, yes, that's also me, the screen loses its power. The performance becomes real, because it's no longer a performance. It's the truth. Scenario 3. The professional catastrophe. Let's take this into the domain of power, where the stakes are higher and the consequences are real. You're in a position of authority. You made a decision, and it was wrong. Not catastrophically wrong, but clearly a mistake. And now people are noticing. You've got two paths. Path 1, hide it, justify it, blame external circumstances. Double down, spend enormous energy maintaining the fiction that you didn't make a mistake, that it was actually the right call, or that you were misunderstood, or that other people failed to execute properly. This is the persona in overdrive. I am competent, I am infallible, I am in control. And the more you insist on this, the more fragile you become, because everyone knows it's a lie. And now they're watching to see how far you'll go to maintain it. Path 2, the path of true power. You acknowledge it immediately. I made a mistake. Here's what I learned. Here's the correction. This is shadow integration in action. You're owning the part of you that is fallible, that doesn't have all the answers, that screws up sometimes. And by owning it, you've removed it as a weapon. The people around you can't use it against you because you've already said it yourself. The cover-up would have destroyed you. The acknowledgement makes you stronger. Jung saw this pattern everywhere. The leaders who fall hardest are the ones who can't admit error. The relationships that implode are between people who can't acknowledge their flaws. The people who break under pressure are the ones who've built their entire identity on denying their humanity. The shadow isn't just some abstract psychological concept. It's the mechanism of your vulnerability. Every quality you reject, every emotion you bury, every truth you can't face, those are the strings someone else can pull to control you. And here's the deepest layer, the part that most people never reach. The shadow isn't just your enemy, it's your teacher. Because buried in the shadow, beneath all the qualities you've rejected, there's often tremendous power. The man who's terrified of his anger might be avoiding his capacity for assertiveness. The woman who's ashamed of her sexuality might be denying her creative power. The person who fears their neediness might be rejecting their capacity for deep connection. Jung called this the gold in the shadow. The qualities you exile aren't just weaknesses, they're often strengths you've mislabeled because they didn't fit your self-image. But you can't access that gold until you're willing to dig through the dirt. You can't integrate the power until you acknowledge the wound. And that brings us to the paradox. The thing that sounds completely backwards but is the only way out. Remember what I said at the beginning about emotional invulnerability? That the people who try hardest to appear invulnerable are the easiest to destroy? Now you understand why. The fortress you built to protect yourself is the thing that's making you fragile. The mask you wear to hide your weakness is broadcasting it to everyone who knows how to look. But here's the paradox. The thing Jung discovered that most people never grasp. You become invulnerable the moment you stop trying to be invulnerable. You become untouchable when you acknowledge you can be touched. You remove the detonator by admitting it exists. What's happening is this. When you acknowledge a weakness, you transform it from a hidden vulnerability into a known reality. And known realities can't be used for manipulation the way hidden vulnerabilities can. Think about it. What gives a secret its power? The fact that it's hidden. The fear of exposure. The gap between what people think about you and what you know to be true. The moment you say the thing out loud, the moment you bring the shadow into the light, that gap closes. There's nothing left to expose, nothing left to threaten you with. This is what Jung meant by integration. Not destroying the shadow, not getting rid of your flaws or weaknesses or vulnerabilities, but acknowledging them, owning them, including them in your conscious sense of self instead of exiling them to the basement. Integration doesn't mean becoming weak, it means becoming whole. And wholeness is what creates true invulnerability. Let me show you what this looks like in practice. The man who's integrated his shadow can hear a woman tease him about being needy without his chest tightening, because he's already acknowledged to himself that yes, he has needs. He's not ashamed of it. He's not trying to hide it. So the tease has nowhere to land. The woman who's integrated her shadow can be called too much or too emotional without spiraling, because she's already made peace with her intensity. She's not performing calmness. She's genuinely at peace with who she is, including the parts that don't fit other people's comfort. The leader who's integrated their shadow can have their mistakes pointed out without getting defensive, because they've already acknowledged they're not infallible. They're not trying to maintain the illusion of perfection. They're focused on the truth, not the image. Integration removes the gap between who you are and who you're pretending to be. And without that gap, there's nothing for manipulation to exploit. But here's where it gets even deeper. Because integration doesn't just make you invulnerable to other people's manipulation, it frees you from your own. Think about how much energy you spend managing your image, controlling what you say, monitoring how you come across, avoiding situations where your weaknesses might be exposed, defending against perceived attacks, proving you're not what someone implied. That's exhausting, isn't it? It's a full-time job, maintaining the persona. And every moment you spend on that performance is a moment you're not actually living. Jung believed the goal of psychological development, what he called individuation, was to become who you actually are, not who you think you should be. And that requires facing the shadow, all of it, the weakness, the pettiness, the fear, the parts of you that don't fit the hero story you've been telling yourself. When you do that, when you look directly at the thing you've been running from, something remarkable happens. The fear loses its grip, the shame dissolves, and you realize the thing you were so terrified of isn't actually that scary. It's just human. You're not uniquely broken. You're not secretly terrible. You're just a person with flaws and strengths, light and shadow, all of it woven together into something complex and real. And from that place of integration, you become genuinely powerful. Not the fake power of the persona, the performance that cracks under pressure, but the real power of someone who knows themselves completely and isn't afraid of what they see. That's Carl Jung's secret rule for emotional invulnerability. Know yourself. Own yourself. Integrate yourself. The parts you're proud of and the parts you're ashamed of. The strength and the weakness. The light and the shadow. You cannot be manipulated by a truth you've already acknowledged. You cannot be controlled by a weakness you've already owned. You cannot be broken by a mask you're not trying to maintain. The fortress was always the prison. And the only way to be truly invulnerable is to stop hiding behind walls and stand in the open, exactly as you are. So how do you actually do this? How do you integrate the shadow instead of just understanding it as a concept? Because here's the thing. Most people hear this and think, okay, I get it. I should accept my flaws. And then they go right back to defending them the moment someone points them out. They've added, I accept my shadow to the persona without actually doing the work. Real shadow integration isn't comfortable. It's not a one-time realization. It's an ongoing practice of looking at the parts of yourself you'd rather not see. So let me give you the actual process. Not 5 easy steps, not a hack, but the real work Jung prescribed for becoming whole. First, identify what triggers you. Your triggers are the map to your shadow. Anytime you have an emotional reaction that seems disproportionate to what actually happened, that is shadow material. Stop judging the reaction. Notice it. Write it down. I felt disproportionately angry when this happened. This is the first step in claiming authority over your own psychology. Second, ask what the trigger reveals. The trigger isn't about the external event. It's about what that event touched inside you. So ask yourself, what part of me felt threatened? What truth am I afraid of? If you got defensive when someone called you insecure, ask, am I insecure? Is there truth in what they said? And if there is, why am I so terrified of that being true? If you felt abandoned when someone didn't text back, ask, what wound is this touching? When did I learn that silence means rejection? This is uncomfortable work. Your mind will want to deflect, to justify, to explain why the other person was wrong. But that's the persona trying to protect itself. Your job is to push past that and look at the raw truth underneath. Third, own it out loud. This is the hardest part. Once you've identified the shadow quality, the insecurity, the neediness, the fear, whatever it is, you have to acknowledge it. Not just to yourself in private, but in the real world. This doesn't mean you walk around announcing your flaws to strangers, but it means when someone touches that quality, instead of defending against it, you acknowledge it. Yeah, I do get insecure about that sometime. You're right, I was trying too hard. I made a mistake there. I'm working on it. The first time you do this, it'll feel like you're handing someone a knife, like you're giving them power over you. But watch what actually happens. Most of the time, the tension dissolves. The power dynamic neutralizes because there's nothing left to attack. You've already said it. Fourth, integrate the opposite. Here's something Jung understood that most people miss. The shadow isn't just the bad qualities you reject. It's also the opposite of your persona. If your persona is, I'm strong and never need help, your shadow contains your capacity for vulnerability and connection. If your persona is, I'm nice and agreeable, your shadow contains your capacity for aggression and boundary setting. Real integration means bringing both sides into consciousness, acknowledging that you are not just one thing. You're not just strong or just weak. You're complex, multifaceted, capable of strength and vulnerability, confidence and insecurity, love and anger. The goal isn't to pick a side, it's to have access to the full range of your humanity and choose consciously which quality the situation requires. Fifth, watch the freedom that emerges. As you integrate the shadow, something shifts. You'll notice you're less reactive, less defensive, less exhausted from maintaining an image. Criticism that used to ruin your day will roll off. Tests that used to trigger you will become irrelevant. You'll be able to hear hard truths without your identity shattering because your identity isn't built on the persona anymore. It's built on the whole truth. And other people will sense it. Not because you're projecting confidence or strength, but because you're genuinely grounded in who you are. There's no performance, no mask, no gap between the image and the reality. That's what makes you invulnerable. Not perfection, wholeness. Now here's the final piece, the piece Jung spent his entire life trying to communicate. This work never ends. You don't complete shadow integration and graduate to some enlightened state where you never have triggers again. The shadow is always there. New layers emerge as you grow. New situations reveal new rejected parts. But that's not a failure, that's the process. Every trigger is an invitation. Every defensive reaction is a signpost pointing to the next piece of yourself that's ready to be integrated. The question isn't, will I ever be done? The question is, am I willing to keep looking? Because most people aren't. Most people get to the edge of the shadow, see something they don't like, and retreat back into the persona. They'd rather maintain the mask and suffer the vulnerability than face the truth and claim the freedom. But you're still here, which means some part of you is ready to look. Some part of you knows the fortress is the prison. Some part of you wants out. So here is the challenge. The next time you get triggered, stop, breathe, and ask yourself, what is this touching? What am I afraid they saw? Acknowledge it, out loud, to them, to yourself, to the world. That is Carl Jung's secret rule for emotional invulnerability. Not building a stronger mask, but removing the mask entirely. Know yourself, all of yourself, the parts you love and the parts you hate, the strength and the weakness, the persona and the shadow. And then stand in the world as that whole, complex, flawed, powerful human being. Because the mask you built for protection has become your prison, and everyone can see the bars. But the moment you tear down the walls and step into the light, exactly as you are, you become untouchable. Not because you have no vulnerabilities, but because you've made your vulnerabilities useless as weapons. That's freedom. That's power. That's real invulnerability. And it's been waiting for you all along, right on the other side of the thing you're most afraid to face.